We made this.
Welcome to the Japan on Film Podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and I am welcoming a new guest today. And welcome to the Japan on Film Podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest today, and that is a fellow podcaster, and that is Jordan Forbes from the Shonen Flop Podcast. Jordan, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing all right, Perry. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Little, as we say in Japan, little bada bada this morning. A little kind of all over the place, as we just found out in our aborted recording just a few minutes ago. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm an artist. I co-host a podcast with my childhood friend David, called Shonen Flop. What we do is, so you got all this manga, all right, and a lot of it turns into anime and gets really successful, but probably most of it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it just gets canceled, and nobody knows what the hell happened to those series or anything about them. So what we do is we read the manga that gets canceled and thrown away, and we kind of try and see, did this deserve to get canceled?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it unfairly maligned? Spoiler alert, most of them deserve to get canceled. Yeah. A lot of the time you read it, it's like, no, I see why this only went for 20 chapters. Yeah.
Right. So what kind of started this off? Why did you guys decide to start this podcast?
So this was really David's idea. The pandemic hit. He was looking for some stuff to do. This was a pandemic project. And basically what he told me was he was reading this manga called Zip Man. And basically it started and he was like, this probably is going to get canceled. And then it was. And he was like, I wonder how much other manga gets canceled like this? What's that like? So that kind of started it. What's really funny though is that shortly after we put out our first episode, we got a message from this other podcast. They were gonna call themselves Shonen Flop, and they had the same concept we had, and they'd been talking about it for months, but didn't get together with the first episode until after we did it. So it was like, sorry guys, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, they wound up changing the name to Shonen Fiasco. I'm not sure that podcast is still around, but yeah.
I had a opposite problem. So we actually had David on my other show, Superhero Cinephiles, and when I was starting up that show, I had originally wanted to call it Superhero Cinema. There was another podcast with that name. I'm like, damn it, okay. And then I changed the name of it and started our podcast. And now I think that Superhero Cinema Podcast, I think that's dead and buried. So I should have just waited a little bit, and then I could have taken the name myself.
Hey, I think I think Cinephiles is a little bit more specific than just cinema.
I think it sounds a little bit better. Yeah, it did work out for the best. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your history then? How'd you get interested in manga, in anime, or in Japanese films? Live action films is what we specialize in over here. So what's kind of your history with those things?
Well, when I was a little kid, Pokemon came out and I thought it was really dumb. And then I was at my cousin's house. I was 6 years old and he put on a Pokemon VHS, and I actually thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And then when I was 12 or 13, Shonen Jump started getting printed in America. And I picked up every issue for 2 or 3 years. I at one point I had this unbroken collection of 2 full years of American printed Shonen Jump, and I was very proud of it at the time. But yeah, no, and Toonami was huge. I got super obsessed with things like DBZ. I feel like anybody listening here knows what the acronym DBZ stands for.
Right, yeah.
But DBZ, I was into Naruto for a bit, One Piece, of course. Yeah, a lot of, and it's just kind of always been something that I've been interested in.
Awesome. And what about
Yeah.
when did you make the jump into live action Japanese films? Or are you still more focused on like the anime and manga side of things?
I'm definitely more focused on the anime and manga side of things. I haven't really seen that many Japanese movies. Oh man, like I'm honestly I'm kind of struggling to think of like other ones I've seen. The one that comes to mind immediately though is Wild Zero.
Mm-hmm.
You know what that is? Yeah,
Yeah,
like the Guitar Wolf movie. Yeah.
yeah. I've got it. I actually own it, but I have not seen it yet, but I know it.
That movie kicks ass. It
Okay.
is ridiculous. I definitely recommend it.
Oh wait! You said Wild
so
Zero? I was thinking Wild 7,
Yeah.
so I was thinking of a different movie.
Oh no, Wild Zero.
I'll have to look that up then as well. All right.
Oh yeah. Do you know who Guitar Wolf is?
It sounds
I feel like
vaguely familiar. I mean, I'm not really clued into Japanese music, so I don't know a whole lot about the Japanese music scene.
Well, I didn't either until a friend of mine showed me that movie. I was like, "Oh, that's fucking awesome!" Oh, it's just completely ridiculous. It's like aliens and zombies attack at the same time, and Guitar Wolf is there and tried to help save the world with rock and roll. It's pretty great. Aside from that, I saw Seven Samurai, of course. That movie's incredible, of course. I don't think I'm blowing anyone's mind by saying that. I don't think that's a hot take. Yeah, I've seen like a couple Kurosawa films. I've wanted to see more. The other one was Yojimbo that I saw. Yeah, it's more something that in the back of my mind I've always thought was interesting, but haven't really had a big chance to delve into. So I'm really grateful, actually, you invited me here. I got a chance to watch a really cool movie, I think.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and we've got 60 some episodes in the backlog for you to go back and get some more recommendations. But and I've been harping on this issue for a while. Is one of the problems with a lot of Japanese movies now compared to when I first got interested in them back in the early 2000s. There was this huge wave of US DVD distributors putting out Japanese movies in the US market. And so you had places like Tartan Tartan Extreme was one of them. Arrow Films was another. And there are a whole bunch of other ones. Criterion still puts out a lot of good ones, but most of Criterion's ones tend to be like the classics, which is great. But there's a lot of newer stuff too that just has kind of gotten ignored now. And a lot of the movies that I bought back in the early 2000s, when I'm finding guests to bring them on and I'm trying to show them where to get the DVD, most of those DVDs are now out of print. So it's really kind of disappointing that that kind of wave of content has kind of stopped, making it more difficult. But I'm hoping the streamers will pick it up sooner or later. I know Netflix has been doing some stuff. HBO Max has a few things out there, but yeah, getting more of this stuff out in the US marketplace would be great, so people don't have to rely on piracy.
To be fully honest, I found this on archive.org. It was just right there.
I mean,
like...
as an author,
right.
Yeah. Like as an author, right. In principle, I don't like piracy, but also on a practical level, if it's not available, what do you expect people to do? I mean, there's no other way for people to consume that content. So I totally get it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
Or especially when some stuff is not even when it might be available, but for example, like here in Japan, when I first came here, I thought, oh, great, I can watch all these Japanese movies. I'll be able to get them right from the source. But the vast majority of them don't have English subtitles. And the ones that some of them don't have any subtitles at all, not even Japanese subtitles.
Really?
Yeah, that's
so it's all audio.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now since I've gotten a Plex library, now I've gotten around that where if I buy a movie, if it doesn't have subtitles, I can usually find the subtitles online and just burn them into the video file. But
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. But
I had to do that one time when I watched MD Geist. If you've ever seen that.
no, but it sounds familiar.
It's a very silly 90s anime. Late 80s anime, actually. But yeah. No, so that's awesome that you're at least able to get around it in some way.
In some way, yeah. There are ways around it, not all of them necessarily legal, which is why I keep hammering on this point of, put more of this content out there in the West and it'd be easier for people to get this stuff.
Of course.
Yeah. But the movie we are talking about today, and you said you really enjoyed watching it. This is one of the classics of semi-modern classic, I think we call it, because it came out in 1973. Battles Without Honor and Humanity. The Japanese title is Ringi na ki Tatakai. And this
What a title,
yeah.
By the way.
This movie was kind of big in a lot of ways. I'm not sure if you'd done any background research on it, but I got to shout out the director too, Kinji Fukasaku. Who have you ever seen Battle Royale?
No, but like I'm aware of Battle Royale. People have always talked about that movie.
Yeah.
Like that seems like from what I've heard, it's kind of like a modern classic.
It is, yeah. I mean, that is far and away my favorite Japanese movie.
Really?
And it wasn't for a long time. Like for a long time when I was still in America, I'm like, oh yeah, it's okay, it's fun. But after I moved to Japan and I started learning more about the culture and the society and the history, and then when I rewatched Battle Royale and prepared to teach it in my class, I teach a class in Japanese film study, and I realized just how many layers that movie has to it and just how much it has to say about Japanese society. And at that point, it became my favorite Japanese movie. But Kinji Fukasaku, he directed that movie too.
Yeah. He did Battle Royale too?
He did Battle Royale.
Wow, he had a long career.
He had a long career. Battle Royale was his final movie, I believe, and he had started work on Battle Royale 2, but then he died in the middle of it, and then his son took over from there.
Oh, is that why nobody likes Battle Royale 2?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first one too was was also based on a novel. There was no sequel novel when they did the second one. And I'm not sure how much of it was, just the loss of Fukasaku. I'm not sure how much of it was not having any source material to base it on. But, I mean, there's some interesting ideas in Battle Royale 2, but I think one of the biggest problems is you didn't have Fukasaku's skillful hand to kind of guide those ideas and bring them to fruition.
Oh, yeah. No, so most of the research I did was on the Wikipedia page. And one of the things that really stood out to me that just blew my freaking mind. By the way, can I curse on this?
Yeah,
I don't know like how much I can. Yeah. Something that just blew my fucking mind was that like the idea came from when the actor read the lead actor read an article written by like a former Yakuza, and 6 months later the movie's released.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah. The Japanese film industry, there's a lot of churn that goes through it, and because their budgets are very small, their profit margins are a lot smaller than like what you'd see in like the American marketplace, because they're 99% of their movies are just intended for the domestic Japanese audiences. So you don't have a whole lot of money to play with like these big effects. And the directors in these movies, you said Fukasaku had a long career. Yeah, that's pretty standard for Japanese directors. You don't have this case like Quentin Tarantino, who this is the one comparison I made in the last episode. So sorry for listeners who I'm repeating myself, but Tarantino and Takashi Miike started off directing about the same time, very early 90s. Tarantino's made like 10 movies in that time frame. Miike's made like over 200 movies in like that same amount of time.
Damn.
Because he's someone who'll do like 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 movies a year, and that's very standard for these Japanese movies. They have very tight filming schedules. You're talking like 6 weeks or up to 10 weeks or something like that to shoot something. And then then they'll reuse the sets for something else. We were talking about the Machine Girl last season, and they have this setting that's just like this kind of, it's just this very, it was this set in this forest and just feels like a weird place to have this setting. But we figured like, oh, well, that's probably what the studio has access to. So they'll probably use it, you know, this week we're doing Machine Girl. Next week we're doing this other movie here. The week after we've got this other movie here. So they just reuse a lot of these sets and just bring these directors in to just like, okay, so, you know, these 2 months I'll be doing a Yakuza movie. Next 2 months I'll be doing a horror movie. After that I'll be doing, you know, an erotic thriller or something like that. And there's just a lot of that churn and a lot of that jumping from genre to genre.
You just reminded me of like two of my favorite Japanese movies I totally forgot that I had seen until just now, which is Tetsuo the Iron Man and Hausu.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That like, but no, I mean, I think what you just said kind of explains to me why there's 500 Godzilla movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's this like very structured and I'm looking for the word, very like I guess like workman-like quality that you get from this, where it's like, look, this is a job. We gotta make the movie, we gotta put it out, and then we gotta make the next one. You know,
right.
It's very, there's like this very quick craftsman like quality to it that is where it really, you're right, it isn't about like resting on its laurels. Like it's more like the production mentality feels more like TV than American movies, at least, you know, where it's like, well, that was great, but we got to make another episode like next month, you know.
It's also very similar to the old studio system back in the early days of Hollywood. It's a lot of similarities to that. Except a little bit more, slightly more artistic freedom though, right? Usually when they have, especially like these low budget movies, the Pinkuega, the Pink films are a great example of it. These were, I'm not sure if you know anything about Pink films, but they're basically, you know, softcore porn essentially, right? The kind of stuff you'd see on back, if anybody remembers, back in the days of Cinemax, that kind of stuff.
I could have guessed, honestly.
But what it basically was they said these studios would go to these directors and they'd hire these very young, inexperienced directors, bring them on, and they'd say, okay, you've got 90 minutes. You have to have 3 sex scenes in the movie, and that was it. That was their mandate. Outside of, and this is your budget. Outside of that, they were free to do whatever they want. So you had a lot of experimentation with directors just trying different things, because the studio was like, as long as you stay under budget and on time and give us our required number of sex scenes, we don't care what you do. And so there was awesome. So there was a lot of interesting stuff that came out of that because of that. And I think it's very similar with a lot of the other exploitation type movies that they come out with, right? They'll say like, you know, we need this much action, we need this much violence, we need this much blood or something like that. You stay under budget though, and you stay in the time frame, and you're golden, and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, the more you describe it, it does actually remind me of a lot of like lower budget exploitation movies, like from America. Like I feel like that's something like Russ Myers would do. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, if you ever seen that. You know, and just like the sheer amount of cheesy, trashy 70s movies and 80s movies and stuff. But yeah, it's so interesting how, despite that, the movie doesn't feel cheap at all. Like it doesn't feel rushed.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't. And I think that's part of that workman-like quality. Like because they're making so many movies at the time, they're able to really kind of improve their craft and really able to make do with what they have.
You get that 10,000 hours in. You
know? Yeah. But this was also a big revolution in the type of Yakuza movies that were being made at the time. So one of the things that people don't realize about the Yakuza is just how much their hands are involved in legitimate business dealings. Like you got the typical ones like construction or union activity or stuff like that. But you also have other types of businesses like real estate, like movies, especially pornography. The Yakuza are really big in the pornography industry, but also they're involved in low budget films. So a lot of, and there was a time in Japan when the Yakuza were almost like folk heroes. And there were even magazines devoted to different Yakuza groups. In fact, you may notice at the beginning of the movie when he tells Shozo to go to the Yamamori's clan, and he comes out of, and the cuts, the next scene, he's coming out of a building, and they've got Yamamori Gumi on the sign in the background. That's true. Yakuza groups, they have public headquarters because they're registered as legitimate businesses. So they're involved in this other stuff under the table, but they are semi-public organizations. So you know where their offices are. And one of the things the Yakuza did was they understood very early on that public relations are very important. So they would put out they would finance a lot of movies, a lot of comic books, a lot of novels portraying Yakuza in a positive light. There was a big genre of Yakuza movies up until this one that were called Ninkyo Eiga, or known as chivalry films. And these were mostly set in pre-war Japan, and they depicted the Yakuza as like this, honorable organization.
Samurais.
Almost like samurais. Right? Yeah, they're like modern day samurais. Yeah. In fact, if you've ever seen Sidney Pollack's The Yakuza that came out in the 1974 or 1975. Oh. It's a great movie. But one of the things that they say in the opening credits, right, they give you a little description of the Yakuza, and they describe them as being modern day samurai, essentially, right? They said these people, they have this description. They say they used to be called samurai. Today they're called the Yakuza. Completely factually inaccurate, but that's
yeah, no, of course. No, it honestly, I think there's a ton of parallels between that and like The Godfather. Mm-hmm. How like like that movie came out and it made gangsters, like the mafia gangsters, mafiosos, look so cool. Mm-hmm. And like refined and have all this honor. And again, none of it was true.
Yeah.
Like the Italian mafia actually, started trying to look more like that, but it was because of the movie.
Right.
Because the movie looks so cool. Like, so that totally makes sense.
Now, what's interesting, though, is that this film did the opposite of what The Godfather did. Because what The Godfather did, like you said, it kind of legitimized the mafia in a way, made them look cool and everything.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're back on. I had to pause for a brief moment because my son was getting a little bit fussy. So anyone watching on YouTube, that's why I'm suddenly holding a baby. But anyway, like we were saying, The Godfather, it kind of gave mafia this image of being cool, of having like this code of honor, right? There's that very famous scene in the movie when Marlon Brando says, we're not, when he refuses to sell drugs, right? He's like, there's this line, we're not going to cross it. And then eventually he says, okay, you can sell them, but don't sell them to our people. So there's this kind of idea, which some historical accuracy, it was borne out that that's how the mafias and all that they started. They were protection societies because the police wouldn't do anything for immigrant communities, which is true. But but what this movie did was kind of the opposite of what The Godfather did. This started what were called Jitsuroku Eiga, or which are called like actual record films, because this was based on, you mentioned the newspaper article. This was based on an article written by Hoichi Iboshi, who, fun fact, he actually graduated from the university that I now teach at. It wasn't called that back at the time, but yeah, he graduated from what became the university that I teach at currently.
That's awesome.
But he had written
man, you're an alumni with Yakuza.
Well, he wasn't the Yakuza, but he had written a series of articles about a Yakuza. And they were rewrites, right? They were the memoirs of a real life Yakuza named Kozo Mino. And Iboshi took those articles, took those, accounts or memoirs or whatever, rewrote them in a series of articles, and then published them in the I can't remember the name of it, the Sankei something newspaper. And then after that, the film studio. They got the rights for it. The Weekly Sankei, that's what it was for. And he'd written, Mino had written these while he was imprisoned in Abashiri prison. And these detailed like Yakuza conflict in Hiroshima. So, and you're right. He, the lead actor, Bunta Sugawara, he says that he had this initial idea. And then he had seen the newspaper articles, he had read them, and then he gave them to a Toei producer. And then right after that, they had ordered a screenwriter to adapt it into a screenplay and kind of flesh out the details and make it more cinematic and more dramatic.
Yeah. God, it was so interesting. Like, you mentioned the whole thing with the in the Godfather where they're like, we're honorable, we don't sell drugs and stuff, and that kind of waivers, and that happens in this movie, except it's like the mafia boss who it's I say mafia, I mean Yakuza obviously, but the way that this movie just completely disrespects like the head of the mafia, like the Yamamori boss and stuff. That was really surprising to me.
Yeah,
the way that it was like, no, this guy is like a coward and a trickster and like weakling and stuff, and he just uses other people. It was very interesting because this that's definitely not something you would see in The Godfather.
Right. Well, even in a lot of Yakuza films, that's not something you would see. And it was very shocking for the time because, people had not done that before, because the Yakuza were always kind of shown as, semi-chivalrous. And it's like, okay, well, they may be criminals, but they've got this code of honor. And this was like one of the first movies, and there have been other movies since, but this was one of the first ones that really kind of stripped that veneer away and, just scratched and said like, yeah, they've got this idea of honor, which they talk about. But, if you actually look at what they do, they're very two-faced about it. And pretty much everybody except for Shozo is like that. Shozo is the only one who has any sort of honor really throughout this whole movie.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this movie, but it is a movie I get the sense where it's like I am missing a lot of context. Like as much like there were definitely like there were a lot of things like where they were praying to his friend's soul kind of in his house and stuff. I had never seen that before.
Right. Yeah.
I was watching that and I was like, is this like a kind of a normal thing?
Yeah. It's a very common thing is you'll find like Buddhist altars and stuff like that in Japanese homes. We don't have one in our home, but my wife's family, whenever we go to her grandmother's place or anything, she's got a shrine there for, my wife's grandfather, my wife's father and her brother who both passed away too. So they've got shrines there, and like, they got like little pictures of each one of them. And instead of like big cemeteries, you have like these, you have cemeteries of a kind, but nobody's actually buried there because everybody gets cremated here. So they're just like these memorial altars, like all over the place in these Japanese cemeteries.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that kind of stuff is very common.
Like the ending of the movie where Shozo is just shooting up all of those memorials. Again, it's like I didn't know the specific significance, but I was able to sense there is some really heavy significance to what he's doing. And like, I got the idea where it's like he is really shocking them.
Yeah.
In this moment. Yeah. That was a really good scene, although I was not expecting it to end right there.
Well, because this was the first of a series, right? The Godfather, five movies in the first series, and then there was another series afterwards called New Battles Without Honor and Humanity. And this was actually released in the West under the banner title of the Yakuza Papers because it was based on these newspaper articles.
Also, because as awesome as the name Battles Without Honor and Humanity is, that doesn't sound like a naturally English
Right.
title. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not snappy and stuff.
Hmm.
Like, although I do think it's kind of the best title that this movie could have. I really like that title. But
Oh yeah, it's it totally fits. This is a great example of a movie title that gives you this movie gives you exactly what the title tells you to expect.
yeah, it's so funny because there was, I mean, obviously the first scene is incredibly violent.
Hmm.
You know, like the first few things that happen are just unbelievably violent. And then like, you know, there's like people getting beat up and stuff, but like no one's dying for a bit. And I'm like, oh, I guess that was just like something happened in the beginning. No,
Hmm.
no. Then everybody started dying.
And
um,
and one of the things this
yeah,
movie does is it the way it punctuates each death, right? With
yeah.
that sound. In fact, when I was watching this last night, my wife had been in the other room, and then she comes out, and she comes in just as a moment when that music plays. And she's like, "Are you watching Battles Without Honor and Humanity?" I'm like, "Yeah, how'd you know?" It's like the music. Everybody in Japan knows that music.
Oh, so that music was like iconic
It's
when like
iconic.
they
She's
died,
never seen this
basically.
movie, but she knows that music.
Oh, that's
Mhm.
awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. Also, the soundtrack kicked ass.
Mhm.
It was like that solid like 70s, like 60s, like almost like that really like jazzy kind of like almost funk rock kind of thing they have going. Oh, that was awesome. Um, I also just thought it was so interesting how you saw the progression from World War II to like a slightly more modern Japan. I felt like I felt like there was a huge significance to the fact that when the oh man, Himamori, I'm blanking. Is that the boss's name?
Oh, Yamamori.
Or Yamamori? Yeah, I thought I feel like it was like very significant that you know, uh as the movie goes on, like earlier on we see like a lot of the bosses wearing more traditionally Japanese clothes, but as it goes on, they start wearing suits and ties and stuff and more westernized clothes.
Mhm.
And I felt like like I feel like that was kind of communicating a lot about the overall time that was going on. I don't have, I'm missing context, but
No, absolutely, absolutely. Like
that was
there were like
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
waves of westernization in Japan. Like it actually started in the Meiji era in the late 1800s. That was when the first wave of westernization really started. And in fact, if you watch movies like Lady Snowblood or the Japanese version of Unforgiven, you could see that that it's very clearly a choice where some characters are dressed in more Western style clothing, while other characters are dressed in more traditional style clothing. Even the Last Samurai, right? That also has aspects of that in there too.
Okay, okay, hold on. I have a question for you. You said the Japanese version of Unforgiven. Is
Yes, I
there
did.
like a separate Japanese movie
Yes,
that's like a like how they made that horrible old boy adaptation with Josh Brolin?
yes,
Is that something that happens in Japan too? Oh,
exactly. Yes,
nice. Hell
yes.
yeah.
There's a long tradition of actually a lot of like in cross cultural influence between Japan and America with their movies. I mean,
Oh yeah.
Kurosawa is a great example. Yojimbo, right? Yojimbo was remade in the West as A Fistful of Dollars, but
Absolutely.
Yojimbo itself was sort of an adaptation of the Dashiell Hammett novel Red Harvest. And so
Oh.
they took what was this classic detective story and they put it in feudal Japan. And then, Sergio Leone came along. He took this, Japanese samurai story and he put it in the Old West. And the Magnificent Seven did the same thing, right? They took this Japanese story, they put it in the Old West because
Star
Unforgiven,
Wars.
Star Wars, another perfect example, right? They took the Hidden Fortress, put it in outer space. Even like Darth Vader's costume, right? Very heavily influenced by samurai armor. In
Oh,
fact,
absolutely.
specifically Masamune Date's armor, right? It's like right out of it. All those lightsaber fights in those original movies before they were able to do do so much they can with CGI, right? They were very much like those old, samurai movie battles. They were very structured like those, and that was done intentionally. The robes the Jedi wore, right? Very similar, kind of like samurai robes and stuff like that.
I was just gonna bring that up. Yeah, there's there is even what Luke is wearing in A New Hope it's one of those things I didn't notice until somebody pointed it out to me, and now it's like, oh my god, yeah, that's very Japanese kind of,
Yeah.
You see it actually starts becoming really blatant in the prequels, kind of. I think, but yeah, no, it's a really interesting way to look at a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but the Unforgiven. So this movie came out in 2013, I believe it was, and it was a Japanese adaptation of the 1992 Clint Eastwood movie. They took it and they had changed the setting from the Old West to Meiji era Japan in Hokkaido.
Oh.
And it is amazing. We did an episode on it a few years back, actually, and I find myself preferring it to the original Unforgiven. It is that good, and it's directed by Sang-il Lee, who's a Japanese-born Korean director, and he is it's starring Ken Watanabe plays the Clint Eastwood role. It's also got Shiori Kusuma from Deadpool. She played Yukio in the Deadpool movie, in Deadpool 2. She's in it too. And Akira Emoto, who's another famous classic Japanese actor, he's in it as well. It's a really great movie, and I definitely recommend trying to get your hands on it. They do a lot of really interesting things with it.
I'll definitely check it out. I mean, I'll have to watch the American Unforgiven too.
You've never seen the American one either? Oh, okay, it's a good one. Yeah.
No, that's one of those. I'm bad at watching movies. There's a ton of movies that I should have seen that I never have. I've never seen Jurassic Park, for instance.
Really? Wow.
Really? Yeah, that's so there's a lot of gaps in my movie watching. But no, that's awesome. But I have seen Fistful of Dollars. So they reverse Fistful of Dollars did, which is funny because yeah, that's Clint Eastwood, right? Yeah, I just put that together. That's really funny.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great movie. But anyway, back to Battles Without Honor and Humanity. Anything specifically that kind of jumped out at you that you wanted to touch on?
Oh man, there was a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens in that movie. One of the things I noticed this in a lot of Japanese movies and stuff, just how cramped everything feels as compared to American movies. In those first scenes where they're running through and there's just people everywhere and there's just very little room. They're just kind of finding their way through everybody. Every room is filled with 20 people. It's really interesting to see, and you're kind of able to also even just the fact that they when the cops break into oh man, what's his name? Starts with a W,
Wakasugi.
Wakasugi. When the cops break into Wakasugi's house, he's in bed with his whole family and stuff. Just little interesting differences there. Yeah, and oh my god, the way the movie starts is so brutal. Oh my god.
Yeah. And and it American audiences might be a little put off by that opening because it opens with a bunch of GIs in post-war Japan, chasing down and trying to rape a Japanese woman, which actually did happen a lot, which actually still happens in some cases. I'm not sure if it was always that blatant in public, but it did happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, this was immediate post-war Japan. If I'd imagine that while it probably never got good, this was probably the worst time period
absolutely
for it, I would imagine. Oh yeah. No, that was a horrifying scene. And But it was also, like, it really set the tone. It really got you in this idea, like, this place is devastated right
Mhm.
now, just completely and utterly devastated. They have lost this war they are in. They are not like, it's a mess. You
And
really get that sense.
the post-war era was a big boom for the Yakuza because, like, the black market was where people had to go. Like, there was nothing else really. So a lot of people survived because of those black markets, which, just like prohibition did for the mafia in America,
Yeah.
the occupation did for the Yakuza in Japan, and that really helped them kind of beef up. Also, it's come out later that they also got some help from the CIA too.
Which one? Which
The
the
Yakuza,
Yakuza?
yeah, the Yakuza and the
Oh,
the right wing party in Japan, they got lots of support from the CIA because
that doesn't shock me.
after the war, all the militarists got put in prison,
Yeah.
and then they released all the political prisoners. All the political prisoners were leftists. So, and the foreign political prisoners, they started moving into the Japanese government, and they started drafting a new Japanese constitution. And the CIA got really scared. They're like, "This is starting to sound a little bit too
You
red
froze
for our
up
taste. So
for a
we got to
second.
we got to clamp this
You
down." So
were frozen.
then they cut deals with a lot of the war criminals, like the Class A ones. They kind of stayed in, but the Class B and Class C war criminals, they got let out, and they started moving into government. And in fact, Nobusuke Kishi, who was the founder of the Liberal Democratic Party, which the joke is it's neither liberal nor democratic. Uh,
Oh, just like the Democrats. What? What? Huh? What?
um, but they kind of took over that party, and they formed that party, and and Kishi was very much a fascist, right? He was a governor of Manchuria, absolutely brutal dictator of Manchuria.
Mhm.
And he was the founder of the LDP, which has been the ruling party in Japan for almost the entirety of the post-war period. And
Really?
Shinzo Abe, the now late former prime minister, was his grandson, and
Oh my
very much
god.
had the same ideas he did about about right-wing fascism and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that still exists in Japan because of the CIA helping to fund these guys.
Wow.
And the Yakuza too.
Wow.
Yakuza had a lot of, still not as much today, but especially back in those early days, they had a lot of ties with the conservative party in Japan. Especially, like, you remember the scene when they're talking with the assemblymen and all that. That kind of stuff was happening all the time.
Yeah, that part really, like, surprised me because it was, like, these, like, gangsters, these
Mhm.
Yakuza, like, kinda like, tough guys. There was just, like, this dude in a suit with glasses who's just, like, just looks like an old, I mean, like a dad
Mhm.
or like a salaryman from what I've,
Yeah,
yeah, that was really interesting. And it was like an extremely, no, we don't want this vote to pass,
mhm.
so you have to do this.
And also, one of the scenes that jumps out to me is the scene in prison, when they're in prison at the first time, when Wakasugi
Yeah.
and he and Shozo meet for the first time, more or less. And he says he's going to commit harakiri. He's going to cut himself open. And Shozo even asks, well, "Why are you doing this?" And the standard answer you'd expect in a Yakuza movie is, "Well, I failed. I got captured. I have to atone for my failure." But he's like, but no, he's being very practical. He's like, "Look, they can't treat me here if I cut myself open. So I'm going to get released on bail if I do this."
That's really interesting. That didn't I mean, that's another thing that, like, I didn't pick up on because I didn't have the context for it, but that's really fascinating. That is kind of specifically playing with your expectations, and
Hmm.
it is like a direct statement, like, "No, these aren't, they're not, like, adhering to Bushido here
Right.
or something. This is a practical, he's trying to survive, basically.
Exactly.
He's
Yeah.
trying to get out." Um, yeah, that was a crazy scene.
But
Oh my god.
it also works for in Shozo's life too, right? Because he starts off saying, like, I'm not part of your Yakuza racket, but he ends up joining up with them pretty much out of necessity, right? Like you were saying about why
Yeah.
Wakatsuki does it. It's kind of what Shozo does too. And that's not uncommon. And the Yakuza specifically target people from marginalized communities, from, poverty, people with poverty backgrounds or from abusive households. They do this deliberately a lot. In fact, a lot of the lower level Yakuza people are Zainichi Koreans and, and people of Chinese descent living in Japan because they're so marginalized in their communities that they've got nowhere else to go.
Yeah. I obviously, again, I'm not super familiar with the Japanese political environment, but having read a lot of manga, I get the general idea that there's a lot of people who do not like immigrants in Japan. Like there is a lot of anti-immigrant stuff in the manga that we cover sometimes.
That does not surprise me. Yeah.
So, yeah. No, but yeah, I think that holds true for most organized crime in the world too. I mean, you can it's interesting how it's like the same tactics kind of get reused a lot of the times.
Well, I mean, taking it back to The Godfather, right? There's when Michael's explaining to Kate about Tom, right? And he says he's a good man. He's not a Sicilian though, but he's a good man. Right? Kind of have to have that little, that little postscript on there. But also when they're talking about selling drugs and he's like, well, sell it to the blacks and to the Hispanics, but don't sell it to our people when it's, and there's this irony in there because it's like you formed this organization because you were being discriminated against to begin with.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that is how a lot of that happens. You try and fight off discrimination by creating like an organized front, and then eventually, I mean, as things corrupt, at least with which it's organized crime. It's organized crime. It's going to get corrupt. It starts turning into like a jingoistic, like pride kind of thing,
right?
And which can spiral out, which can like just turn into racism.
Oh yeah,
straight up.
Well, I mean, and that happened. Another reason why the Yakuza are able to fill their ranks, or at least used to be able to. They've been struggling with recruitment for years now, but one of the reasons they were able to fill their ranks with so many people is because of there are racism aspects for people of Korean and Chinese descent, obviously, but beyond that, there's also the idea of family history is so important in Japan. So, people who come from poor backgrounds or disenfranchised backgrounds, they're not able to, they don't have as much clout in society. So they're much more susceptible to recruitment because of that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's also, you reminded me of like, have you read Chainsaw Man at all? Or
no, I haven't. My wife loves the anime though.
Oh my god, me and David are obsessed with it. We just love it so much. I got my little Puchita right here.
For anyone who's not watching the YouTube video,
gave it to me.
Very nice.
It's a little Puchita stuffed animal that my girlfriend gave me. No, but there's a moment in there where these Yakuza members are talking to Makima, who's a character, and they're just like, hey, look, we're pretty bad, but like we're a necessary evil to keep like the immigrant criminals out of here. You think we're bad? Just wait until like the Russian and Chinese mafia get in here, all right? You need us. And so I completely buy that. That makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I mean,
that there's like a jingoistic aspect.
Well, there's even that attitude with the Japanese police about why they've tolerated the Yakuza for so long, because there's this idea that, look, crime is going to exist. It's better if it's organized as opposed to just, anarchic crime. So there's a lot of that going on too.
Yeah.
Another scene I wanted to talk about was the finger cutting scene, the Yubitsume.
Yeah.
Now, this scene is really interesting because, first off, when they show these scenes in a lot of Yakuza movies, and usually they're they're very drawn out affairs where they show it like being all sort of like formal and everything, and they kind of give it this almost reverence to it in a lot of Yakuza movies. What I thought was so interesting is it's played for laughs in this movie. Because that scene, like, nobody really knows how to do it, right? He says, okay, so I'm going to cut off my finger. And then he's like, how do I do this, by the way? And then the wife has to come in and say, like, he's like, well, I think I know how to do it. And they flip over the tatami mat, bring out the cloth. And then, and she's explaining to him, lean on it so that it, in one breath, and he'll cut it off. And, he cuts it off and he's like, it hurts. And then they lose the finger.
Yeah, they lost the finger. It went into the chicken coop. Mm. They had to dig it out, and then they show it to like the guy who they were trying to
Okubo, yeah.
Who they showed it to Okubo, who they were trying to appease, and he was like, "You didn't have to go that far." No. Yeah, this is kind of ridiculous, man. But yeah, no, I think that in retrospect, I think that's a great way to show that like. Shizo's like is kind of the only one who really cares about this honor,
right?
Like he genuinely does care about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, Okubo's reaction is so funny because it shows that this is a completely meaningless gesture. It doesn't matter to anybody, really.
Yeah. All that happened is now he's missing a finger. That's it.
Right.
He lost his finger.
Another aspect too is that scene when Shozo agrees to, go into prison or basically to go after Doi for Yamamori. And Yamamori, he's like, oh, we don't have, you're like our son. We're going to care for you. Here's all this money we have. And he's like, we're going to take care of you when you come out of prison. And there is some truth to that. Like, one of the reasons why the Yakuza don't carry guns or don't even attack civilians is because that's a guaranteed prison sentence. And when a Yakuza goes into prison, the family has to cover the living expenses for the Yakuza's family and all that kind of stuff. So there is some truth to that. But what happens here is we find out very quickly that they're just kind of like screwing over Shozo. They're just kind of like using him for their own benefit.
They're full of shit. Yeah, no, they that was he comes out, they make him foot the bill for their food. Like they're he comes back and he sacrificed years of his life in jail to kill someone for these people. And they're like, before he goes in, they're like, we're going to give you all our property when you come out. We're going to give you like everything. We're going to take care of you. And he comes out and he's like, yeah, here's your monthly fee. It's not that much. By the way, pay for all the food that we're eating here at this restaurant. Yeah. We're not doing well. And then it's like, and then he immediately turns to a guy, he's like, hey, are they really not doing well? I was like, no, they're doing fantastic. The guy's fucking loaded.
Yeah.
Like he's making a ton of money. They're screwing you over, dude.
Yeah, especially because that time period, right? Because this covers about 10 years from the 1940s, 1950s. The Yakuza were doing very well financially during this time. Like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, those were like boom years for the Yakuza.
Yeah. Oh, man. So the ending scene, like, as we're talking about it, and I'm getting more of a sense for how Shozo like represents like this honorable person, like who believes in like all of the myths and believes in all of the honor around it. When he walks into that memorial service and starts shooting everything up, I could see how that is very significant. Like that was like, because that yeah, I see that scene now, because like all the people who were just completely discarding the honor are now horrified that he's breaking this taboo when they have. And whereas with him, I mean, I'm sure like the sense I got was he was disgusted, where it's like, oh, you guys care now? You care about all this now that everyone's dead.
Another sense I got of it is because one thing that stood out to me this time is the fact that Shozo and everyone else in his gang, they're all former members of the Japanese Imperial Army, right? They're all former soldiers. And there's and Fukasaku has talked about this because he wasn't a soldier during World War II, but he was a teenager, and he was working in a factory. And
I read about this. It was
it's
insane. I
insane,
saw
yeah.
this on Wikipedia. Insane. But yeah, like
So he was
listeners.
So he was working in and I think it was a munitions factory, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I haven't reread it, but so I'm going mostly from memory in it. But it was burned into my brain because I use this as a point whenever I teach Battle Royale in my class. Because Fukasaku said that, you know, he was working this munitions factory, and they believed all the propaganda the government was telling them at the time. And the factory was bombed, and, like, you know, watched a lot of his coworkers and friends die right in front of him. And he had come out of that. And then after the war, you know, they'd been promised, you know, Japan will be victorious and all this. And then they come out of it and everything, and they'd found out it was all just a pack of lies. And after that, he had said he'd come out of that and he had learned not to trust grown-ups, not to trust authority. And that plays heavily into, and I think there's a lot of that in Shozo's character, because, you know, he comes out of the war after believing all of the military propaganda, and now he sees the enemy that he used to fight now running free in his country. And the other former soldiers, right, the other veterans, they're not being cared for. Nobody in Japan is being cared for, basically. They're all just kind of being swept under the rug, while the people who caused the war are getting off scot-free and getting cushy positions, right? All the people in power, right, outside of the Class A war criminals, but the Class B and C war criminals, like Kishi, like I had mentioned, but even like the Emperor and all the companies, the Zaibatsu, right, Toyota, Mitsubishi, all these companies, they were fine. They got off fine. They got lucrative contracts to rebuild the country, and they made out like bandits. And then people like him, who were bearing the cost of the war all this time, they're forced to now scrounge in the black market. And then he finds this home in the Yakuza, and he thinks, okay, this is, you know, things are going to be better now. But then it's the exact same thing, right? Yamamori does to him exactly what the Japanese government did, the Imperial Japanese government did to him.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. Where it's like, you really can see like the prison as this as like a metaphor for fighting in the war. I mean, the movie starts with the bombing of Hiroshima. Like,
right.
The first thing you see in the movie is literally a still of the atomic bomb. So clearly this movie is working on some symbolism and wants you to think, to have in your mind World War II and the bombing of the country. I mean, even just the fact that you know, the first scene you see like the American GIs attempting to rape a woman, you know, like, and they kind of, it's interesting because like I thought that there were going to be more like Americans in the movie, kind of like that. I thought that was going to be like a bigger conflict, but it wasn't really. But maybe that is kind of the point.
Right.
You know?
I think it is. I think it's just to show that this was the kind of situation that was happening, and it was basically kind of just to set the scene in the beginning there of what Shozo must be feeling at that moment, and then having that thread continue throughout the rest of the movie, and just that constant series of betrayals he's feeling.
Yeah. Oh man, like you really feel bad for him. He's like, there are also so many moments in this movie where it is like, if these guys weren't so honorable, they would solve the issue. Like the enemy is taking advantage of the fact that they have honor. Like when Sakai decides that he doesn't want to shoot, that he's like, he doesn't want to kill Yamamori, or and how like the people are all like, well, hold on, he's the boss, all right? Yeah, he's not great, but like he's the boss, you know? Whereas he does not give a shit. He does not care about them at all.
Right. Well, I mean, you look at too, like these guys had been tight in the beginning of the movie, right? Like, you know, Sakai and Shozo, they were part of the same gang, and then it ends with, you know, them vowing, the last things they say to each other is that they're going to kill each other, basically.
Yeah, but I also really loved the moment where Sakai's just like, I'll kill you, but I can't kill you today. I'll maybe tomorrow. I can't do it today. I really liked that scene. That was like, there was a lot of emotions there where they're just sitting on the bed and just kind of talking about how they want to kill each other, but there's still like, you could tell that there's still like all these connections between them and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, you see
Like,
it in the funeral scene too, right? When when he's looking there
yeah,
and he calls him Tetchan instead of calling him, Tetsuya, or calling him Sakai. That kind of like, that very familiar type of name he uses there. And, and even kind of says, is this, is this the kind of thing, are you impressed by all this bullshit basically?
yeah. Sakai's character was so interesting
Mhm.
in this movie. Where he talks about how, like, I drink and then I think I realize, this sucks.
Mhm.
I hate this. I want to leave. And then I wake up in the morning and forget that I felt that way. And then I remember it the night. I can't do anything about
Right. Yeah.
it.
Another thing I want to mention is I
Okay.
want to talk about Sugawara's performance as Shozo. Like
Yeah,
he's just amazing in this movie, and I think he had won an award for his performance, and it's totally
he should have,
yeah,
as he
absolutely.
should have.
But this was also like the time it came out, right? Because this was Japan's economic growth in 1973. It's kind of at its peak. And this was after like the student uprisings of the 1960s. So there was a lot of very familiar feelings that young people at the time were feeling about the way society was going, as people in post-war Japan were feeling, right? It's kind of like this idea of like, okay, well, you know, this is as good as things are about to get worse type of thing. And, and there's really that kind of, that almost defeatist kind of feeling. And I think that this movie spoke to a lot of people back then.
This is not a movie that ends with optimistically. This is
No.
not a movie where you end and you think, man, things are gonna get better. No, it's very tragic the way that it
Mm-hmm.
ends.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he just kind of like, you'd be, in fact, if this was not a series and this ended with this movie, like you could interpret that ending as a few different ways, right? You can interpret it as, Shozo going on and just left the Yakuza behind. You could also interpret it as like, as soon as that title credit ended, just like in like Butch Cassidy, next scene was going to be someone blowing his head off.
Yeah, or I love the line where he's like, "I still have a few bullets
Mm-hmm.
left, Yamamori," like, which is also just a complete 180 from where he was in the beginning, where he was like, "No, he's the boss. Look, I'm a good soldier."
Right. Yeah.
And which that's really what it is. He's a good soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and the horrors of, because they call it war
Mm-hmm.
a couple times too, like this gang warfare. By the way, nobody just gets shot once in this movie. They got shot 50 times
Mm-hmm.
every time. You can't just fire once. You just gotta make sure. You gotta make sure. It's like a zombie.
It
You
is
just want to.
one of the things that's a good point, and one of the things that kind of jumped out to me too is rewatching this is the fact that everybody calls this the Japanese Godfather, whereas the Godfather is just objectively a much more artistically aimed film, whereas this one is much more rougher, and
I really.
it's got like almost a exploitation film quality to it, a grindhouse quality to it,
Yeah.
like with some like when the scene when they cut off the arm.
Yeah, this did not, like, I feel like people say it's Japanese Godfather primarily because it's an influential movie about organized crime.
Exactly.
But the actual movie itself, no, you're totally right. It gave me so much more of like a 70s like grindhouse movie. Like it reminded me more of like Shaft or something than The Godfather,
Absolutely.
honestly.
Yeah, I thought the same thing because I was just double checking before I started watching it. The runtime, it's like, just an hour and 30 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. And so it's definitely not like, The Godfather, which is what, like 2+ hours or something like that.
Oh, maybe even 3.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a long ass movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and also like Yeah, like Godfather, they're kind of complete reverse movies. They're kind of like the opposite. We talked about it earlier, but yeah, The Godfather is all about building up the myth
Right.
of the mafia, and this is all about no, it's bullshit. Yeah,
Well, there's also
it's complete.
there's an interesting character. There's difference in character arcs too, because in The Godfather, Michael has that. It's a tragic story, right? He's he comes in this like this good clean guy. This guy who he comes from this bad family, but he wants to do better. He wants to be more than what his family is, and just slowly, little by little, he starts getting corrupted. And whereas this one, Shozo's character he's pretty much the same guy at the beginning and at the end. The difference is just his trust and his belief in these systems has been broken, but he's still the same person more or less.
He's the same person, but now his actions are different.
Right.
Like he's realized the world that he's in.
Right.
He there has like who he is at his core is the same. It's just like the illusion that he'd been living under is now gone, and now it's there is a change.
Right. Whereas,
I see what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, The Godfather, here's a better way to phrase it. The Godfather is about Michael losing his honor. Shozo never loses his honor. It's about losing his naivete more than that.
Yeah, it's about realizing that the people around him have lost their honor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There any other things? Yeah. Any other points you wanted to mention about this? Anything I haven't brought up yet?
Oh man, I'm sure I'm gonna think of stuff as soon as I leave.
That's always happens to me.
Oh man, because like this really was like such an interesting movie to see. I'm really glad I had I was given an excuse because I need excuses to watch movies anymore. Like I'm really glad I had the excuse to watch this. This was so just really cool. Like, have you seen the sequels?
Yes, I've got the whole series. The first series. I haven't seen the new Battles Without Honor and Humanity series. So there was.
How do the others hold up? Is it like, oh, the first one's great and then it falls off, or is it like good throughout?
It's pretty good throughout. I mean, these movies were all pretty much made like one after the other. So like this one, Deadly Fight in Hiroshima, the second one, and Proxy War, the third one, all of those came out in the same year. And then
it's funny. It feels more like a Netflix miniseries,
right? And then and then 4 and 5. 4 was Police Tactics, and 5 was Final Episode. They came out the following year, and even the new series, New Battles Without Honor and Humanity, that also came out in 1974 too. So these came out. Fukasaku did the first 3, I think. He did New Battles. He did The Boss's Head. And he did Last Days of the Boss. And then there was Aftermath of Battles Without Honor and Humanity. That was directed by Eiichi Kudo. And then there was a newer one that came out in 2000. New Battles Without Honor and Humanity, also known as Another Battle. That was directed by... that's a remake, it looks like.
Another Battle is a hilarious subtitle to give. Like, it's another one.
No, I think what it was the... it wasn't a subtitle. Like it was the Japanese title was just was New Battles Without Honor and Humanity, but I think maybe in the American releases it was called Another Battle, but I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, because the Japanese title is Shin Jingi Naki Tatakai, which is literally New Battles Without Honor and Humanity.
Yeah, that Shin, like the. Like Shin Metroid.
Mm-hmm.
And
they use that a lot in Japanese movies when they do remakes, is they just put Shin on the front of it.
Shin Megami Tensei, it's like the new reincarnation of the goddess, it's like, this isn't your dad's reincarnation. This is the new one. It's not your daddy's Battles Without Humanity. This is a new one. It's great.
But yeah, I never saw the new series. I've only seen the original series. But I get the feeling that these were kind of planned one after another, because this was based on all these memoirs that this former Yakuza had written. So I'd imagine like the articles had gone in depth throughout his life, throughout the whole thing, and that's so I don't think they were struggling to find stuff to fill in the gaps here.
Yeah, I'd imagine. I mean, if you wrote a whole book about various stuff, because this movie, like, it's like how it's like something I notice about a lot of Coen Brothers movies is that they end in a way that initially just feels unsatisfying until you think about it. Like the way that No Country for Old Men ended, it was like, wait, but you didn't finish anything. Guy's still there. But then like you think about it, it's like, well, they did, however, wrap up a lot of like the themes and stuff, and they kind of told the story. It wasn't the story I thought that they were going to tell, but it is the story that they needed to tell.
Right. Also, the new series, it features a lot of the same actors from the first series, but they're playing different roles in this one. So, and it's still like in the same universe. Like it does pick up, it does involve stuff with the Yamamori family and all that. But he instead, Sugawara in this one, he plays a character called Makio Miyoshi. And he had said that even though it's a very similar feel, who is it? One of the producers had said, the biographer, Fukasaku's biographer said that it used the first films as a template, and Sugawara plays more or less the same character, although his character in these ones is more of a reckless punk, he says. So it's almost kind of like not really a remake, but it's maybe like a reimagining kind of thing in a way. I'm not sure if or something along those lines.
Or oh man, like kind of, yeah, like I get what you mean. It's like the closest thing I can think of is like when they put out a new Zelda game, and it's like, oh, don't worry, it's not really a sequel, but it's
more like
similar plot.
A remix, maybe. Let's call it a remix, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good word. Like a remix, an interpolation, or whatever. Like you're going back to it and just kind of seeing what you can do with the basic structure. Something I notice a lot about Japanese sequels is that like a lot of them seem to repeat the structure of the previous one a lot more than like American movies do. Like it's kind of it's like a different mindset. It feels like.
Yeah, you could definitely see that in some of these.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think that about does it for Battles Without Honor and Humanity.
Yeah,
and it is, when people say the Japanese Godfather, I feel like it is kind of like you were saying, it doesn't quite fit, and I think it kind of does a disservice to this movie because it gives people a different expectation from what they're going to get. I'd almost call it the Japanese anti-Godfather movie.
This is closer to the Japanese Scarface, honestly.
I think so. I think that's probably a much better comparison.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially the violence. And
stuff. Yeah. The violence is just, I mean, it's nothing like, Battle Royale is definitely far more over the top in terms of violence. But that's another good point that I wanted to mention is like this kind of, there's like this kind of pseudo documentary feel to it that Fukasaku shoots in. And, he's using normally I hate shaky cam because it feels like the director doesn't know what a tripod is. Like I hate Paul Greengrass's films for that reason. But I could barely watch the Bourne sequels. And
I was just gonna say, like Bourne, like Bourne Ultimatum.
It was ridiculous. Or that
where you can't tell it.
Or what was it? The United 93. I hated that movie because, in large part, because of that shaky cam, but other reasons too.
See, the thing is, like in this movie, a lot of the times you can't tell what's going on, but that adds to the chaos.
Right, exactly.
You're not really, like, in the Bourne movies, it's two guys fighting, and they're standing right in front of each other. You should be able to tell what's happening. Here, it's like a room full of people, and they're brawling, and there's a gunshot going off over there. You don't know who fired it. It's like, the whole it's just incredibly chaotic, and yeah, the shakiness like adds to that. It works here much better than
because in this movie there's a purpose to the shaky cam. I don't feel like Paul Greengrass has a purpose to it. It just feels like he doesn't know what a tripod is.
Well, he just thinks, oh, this is cool. This is a cool little gimmick, it makes it more real. And it's like, not really.
Yeah. But yeah, there's that. It's got that rough documentary feel to it, and especially to the point when they have the name stamped over, like whenever they introduce the characters, they got their name up on the screen, and then when they die, they've got their name stamped along, punctuated with the music. So it's got this very It definitely adds to that kind of like pseudo documentary feel.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I like at first it was you quickly learn that when you hear that music, like, oh, someone's dying. Okay.
Yeah.
This person's dead. And then they show you, no, this guy's dead. No, he's dead. This is the date that he died.
Definitely making sure you understand.
Yeah, like, hey, I've seen a lot of movies where it's like, oh, this guy, I thought he was dead, and then he comes back, and it's like, oh, okay, no, these guys are dead.
Yeah,
they're dead.
Okay. So yeah, the only other thing I guess to say is go on and check out the sequels. Then I don't think I have to do much convincing on that though after this conversation.
No, I'm definitely considering it. Like those. Because this movie was really cool. I would love to see more of it. Like, honestly, just watching more Japanese movies in general is something I would like to do. Because, like, it's so interesting. And I am consuming a lot of Japanese media in general. It's really interesting. But like, the problem, one of the things that attracted me to this is that there is, like, American culture as a whole really seems to have only started caring about Japanese culture in since the mid to late 2000s or so, when anime started getting really big.
I'd argue it probably really started in the late 80s, early 90s, because that's when we started having like the martial arts craze and stuff like that, and cyberpunk, and a lot of that was born out of fears of Japan's economic strength at the time. Which proved to be unfounded, but that was kind of what, and that was why so much cyberpunk at the time kind of predicted this future where Japanese culture would become dominant in the world and in America.
Oh yeah.
So you see a lot of that, but
watching Ghost in the Shell was so interesting.
Oh yeah. Well, even like Blade Runner or other type of like 80s cyberpunk, like there's tons of that stuff, or even Die Hard, right? The Nakatomi Corporation, all that kind of stuff.
Well, what I'm basically getting, what I mean by that, it's not so much interest as it is, like, we cover a lot of manga. A lot of manga was canceled. Obviously, over Shonen Jump's long, 60+ year history, they've canceled a ton of manga. But you can't find translations for this manga, for any manga that basically came out before 2010.
Right.
If it was canceled,
okay.
because nobody gives a shit about it. So it's like, in that sense, like there has been like a huge uptick in basically like international media, really, like especially with like the internet and stuff. Like the concept of media being closed off has kind of disappeared. Like, oh, you like even just the fact that like you can watch anime the day it comes out in Japan. That alone, as somebody, I remember watching Toonami, looking up Dragon Ball Z and discovering, wait, they already finished the series?
Yeah.
What? Because like to me it was like they just met Boo. How does this website know how Dragon Ball Z ends? Like, it was very confusing to me.
Well, yeah, and,
but yeah,
I mean, like, you even think about video games too. I mean, when I remember when like Final Fantasy VII came out, and it was like a year before it came out in the US, and even that was like a rush translation. Now the games come out simultaneously.
Oh, I've been playing the Final Fantasy VII remake. I've been on a real FF7 kick recently. No, I mean, even just the fact, it's rad. Like, probably, like, I'm having fun with it. It's really cool to see. I beat the first disc in like when I was like 13 or 14, and I didn't get much beyond that. So I have enough to have some nostalgia for it. But yeah, but even just the fact that Final Fantasy II in America is Final Fantasy IV.
Right.
And Final Fantasy III is Final Fantasy VI. Like, they didn't even bring over 2, 3, the real 2, 3, and 5.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Until much later. And then eventually they did, but yeah, it took a while to get those things here. And
Yeah.
Or like, what was it? Dragon Ball GT. I remember a friend of mine when I was in junior high school showed me a bootleg that he got at a convention or something of that. And it was, I think they eventually aired it in the US, but it was like years later.
They did.
Yeah. After
Years
later
did.
after I lost interest in it too.
Wait. So that means you haven't heard the intro to the American Dragon Ball GT.
No, I have not.
You? It's a rap intro.
Oh, Jesus.
Welcome to the Grand Tour, Dragon Ball GT. It's very bad.
Just hearing that, just like, okay, I'm definitely going to not look that up on YouTube after we're done here.
Oh God, it's not good. It might not be as bad as the One Piece rap, but it's approaching.
But you know what's interesting is, all this you're right, all this anime, all this manga is now getting a lot more, video games too, getting a lot more attention in the US. They're getting like same day releases, but the movies are still not catching up with the live action movies, which is kind of a disappointment.
Yeah.
And I wish, taking it back to this, I'm going to be harping on this as long as this show goes on, either until this show ends or until something changes. I'm going to be harping on this point that we should really get more distributors releasing this stuff in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why anime should be such a cultural powerhouse, but like the Japanese live action movies aren't. Like, there's really, I mean, it's the same thing. You get a subtitle track and you can watch it.
Right. And in fact, don't get me wrong, I like anime, I like manga, but one of the reasons why I tell people when they want to come on the show, I'm like, I'm limiting anime to only like 2 episodes per season because there's so many other shows that do that. And we're pretty much like the only one that does live action.
No, I really appreciated that. And like, especially because like, sometimes when I have watched Japanese live action, it's been like tokusatsu.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting. Like, it's been really interesting to see a movie that's like, no, this is just a movie.
Mm-hmm.
This is just genuine Japanese cinema.
Yeah.
It's not tokusatsu, it's not anime, it's like, this is a gangster movie.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff that people don't really bother to look for in the stuff that people don't necessarily associate with Japanese entertainment, right? Like, like you said, tokusatsu or anime. When people talk about Japanese movies, that's what they think of. They think of tokusatsu, they think of anime, they think of samurai, they think of Yakuza, or they think of horror. But
maybe they think of like, I was going to say horror. Yeah.
But they don't really think of, there's a lot of like really interesting Japanese, dramatic movies, some of which we've covered here on this show, that are very good and can actually teach you a lot about the culture. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. Yeah. Even just this movie, right? Talking about the post-war era of Japan. There's an excellent book if anyone who wants to know more about this, it's called Embracing Defeat by John Dower. It's a huge book. It's a really thick book. You could like kill someone with it, but it is a captivating read. Like his style is very good. I just breezed through that book.
Oh, that's cool. And I guess I'm guessing from the title that's about dealing with the loss in World War II.
It's all about the occupation and what came after. It's an amazing, well-researched book, and it's like I said, it's a really good read. Like, it's not, you see a book like that and you think, oh God, this is gonna take me forever to finish. I finished that thing in a week because I couldn't put it down.
Wow. Hey, that's a good sign.
All right. And I think it's on audiobook too, so that'll definitely go through fast on audiobook as well. But anyway, Jordan, thanks so much for coming on, and why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff?
Well, if you want to check out my paintings, I just did a 4 foot by 4 foot abstract acrylic painting. I was commissioned for that, and I'm working on another one because this guy commissioned me to make one painting a month for a year.
Oh, nice.
I don't know why he did that, but I'm doing it. You can check out my Instagram. It's Jordan Forbes Art. If you want to see my website with more of my paintings on it, it's jordanforbes.art. I got that as soon as I saw that dot art was becoming a thing. I like watched the site until it was available. If you want to check out my podcast, though, check out Shonen Flop. You know, that's where you can find us, shonenflop.com, or just, you're using a podcast thing. You're either on a podcast app or YouTube. You could type in Shonen Flop. Either one of those, you'll find us. We're kind of everywhere that you look for podcasts. Our Twitter is at Shonen Flopcast. You can check out my other podcast that maybe I'll be updating soon. I hope I do, but I have no executive function. David is the one with that. You can check that out. It's called Mission Ignition, where we talk about a TV series that only I remember called Vampires. And by that, I mean VAN-PIRES. It is terrible and may have Gary Oldman in it.
No way.
Okay, so there's a character named Van Helsing. He's named this because he was a roadie for the Rolling Stones. This is late 90s. This show came out. He's a roadie for the Rolling Stones. Mick got laryngitis, and they're like, Van Helsing. And then on the credits, it lists everybody is listed by their name, but Van is listed as himself. There was like a rogue edit to Wikipedia years ago where it said Van Helsing, Gary Oldman in an uncredited role. And since then, I have been staring at this guy, and I can't convince myself that it's not Gary Oldman.
Wow.
Like hiding because he doesn't want. It looks like he's just wearing a fake rubber nose, fake glasses, and a fucking fake mustache. It's completely ridiculous. Terrible show, but ridiculous.
Wow. All right.
Oh man. So yeah, that's Mission Ignition. If you want to check that out.
All right. So we'll have links to all that stuff in the show notes. You could also check out, Jordan's co-host David. He appeared on Superhero Cinephiles, like I mentioned earlier. He appeared on an episode when we talked about the Iron Giant. So you can go check that out too at superherocinephiles.com.
Nice.
But that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the We Made This podcast network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, merchandise, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JapanOnFilm. If you'd like to help support the show, you can donate at japanonfilm.com, wemadethisnetwork.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links with information about each guest and join the discussion on the We Made This Discord in the show notes of each episode. And now, listen to hear what's coming up next on the We Made This Network.
Hello, and this is Frame to Frame, part of the We Made This Podcast network. We are a podcast that take two seemingly unconnected films and slam them together with the most obscure theme that we can find. I'm Andy Williams.
And I'm Sean Wilson.
And every Wednesday, you'll be able to find out a little bit more about the different themes and different films that we look into, with insights such as this.
You're literally crying with laughter as you're recording, because it just snowballs on and on and on. And it kind of reaches this kind of idiotic nirvana. As in, like, what is he doing? This is the guy that made The Sixth Sense?
The fact that it ends where oh my gosh, we're in two separate places, but we need to get outside to see to each other, to be together. And then they look at each other, and then nothing happens.
so it's the unhappening, and it's like
the big twist, the big M. Night Shyamalan twist at the end of the film is that nothing happens. You know, the very bothersome thing on Rotten Tomatoes that you cited about the idea that there is somehow a difference between the way critics see movies and audiences see movies. Well, yes, but critics watch films as an audience, so critics are an audience. So that's a complete fatuous thing. The reason critics get into criticism is because they love it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's all that it is. The reason we do this podcast is because we love film.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as a wrong reason to laugh at Moonfall.
legitimately, I had so much fun. And I remember telling you at the time, on our Roundup of the Year podcast, we will be doing Moonfall. And you said,
and you remember
oh
my
no,
face.
we won't.
Yeah, I mean, how crestfallen I was.
And I said, oh yes, we will.
Yeah, I mean, never mind Moonfall, crestfallen is what I would call it.
Be sure to check your podcast app of choice every Wednesday to find new episodes. You'll be able to like, subscribe, and find us on social media at Frame to Frame Pod.